Hi, welcome back to my channel. And today I just want to mount a small defence of a little movie that I saw recently that I really enjoyed, but I've noticed has got lots of negative press online. And it's the latest film by Ben Wheatley, In the Earth. Now, the first problem with this movie is it's labelled as folk horror. Now, folk horror is a new phenomenon. When I was a kid, The Wicker Man, Penda's Fen, Witchfinder General, that are now held up as tent poles of this genre, they weren't called folk horror. They were just horror films that had this in common: an interest in folklore, witchcraft, the history of the English landscape, the Green Man, etc. But now it's become a brand, hasn't it? This is what happened when nerds and fans of films from the past, they recognise a strain of thinking and then they turn it into a brand, and then people start making films in that brand. So, for example, in the old days we had Performance and Get Carter and The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins, and these were British gangster films, and they got recognised as a subgenre. So then you got the gangster film, the British gangster film, and you got all those awful films by Guy Ritchie with Brad Pitt in, like Lock, Stock and Smoking Barrels and Snatch. It became a thing. This is what British gangster films are. And now we've got this thing, this brand called folk horror. And just in the past week, I happened to have seen two very recent examples of it: Alex Garland's Men and Ben Wheatley's In the Earth, one of which I loved and one of which I hated. And the problem that both of these films have, neither of the films is brilliant, to be honest, they both have the same problem. They've landed themselves with this brand of folk horror, right? And what happens is, both directors, both Alex Garland and Ben Wheatley, are very keen not to make just another horror film. They're making a comment almost on folk horror. It's almost a meta film about folk horror. They can't just tell us a straightforward story that the audience can draw inferences from and meaning from. They've got to sort of show off their idea of the themes and what folk horror talks about. And that gives them a problem as filmmakers and as storytellers. How much do you give of the plot, right, the straightforward classical narrative, but take away enough of that to engender a sense of mystery and a sense of thematic power? And how much do you give the sort of thematic power and overload, right, to make out that you're not making a normal horror film, but a sort of arty horror film, while still anchoring the audience in some kind of narrative? Now, Alex Garland gets this very, very wrong in his film Men. Men is a very strange film indeed. It's about this woman, she's a sort of middle-class worker in London, and her husband commits suicide. And to get over it, she goes to the countryside, to a country home, to have a stay in the country. But while she's there, she gets stalked by this weirdo. Rory Kinnear bizarrely plays every single man in the story. So the guy who rents the house to her, this weirdo who stalks her through her gardens, the policeman who comes to get the weirdo, everyone is played by Rory Kinnear. And that's a warning signal right there. The most overrated actor of modern times. But anyway, and it's a very silly film that's so concerned with its theme about men and women and their relationship to the land, to the Green Man and to the Earth Goddess, that the story is just ridiculous and it becomes almost cliched. So it has one beautiful scene where the woman, the protagonist, goes into a tunnel and she thinks she's on her own and she makes echo sounds and she's enjoying the echo, and then she starts doing melodies with the echo and she creates her own music echoing through this dark unconscious space. And then, unfortunately, the musical call is answered. And right at the end of the tunnel, in silhouette, she sees the figure of a man. And he gets up and starts running towards her. A brilliant image. The film could have stopped there. It could have been a short, and it would have said everything it needed to say. The rest of the film is awful and is completely gratuitous. So, Alex Garland gets it wrong. That sort of balance of narrative and theme, which these kind of modern art house auteurs are trying to do with folk horror, he gets it terribly wrong. Now, Ben Wheatley gets it wrong as well. But Ben Wheatley gets it wrong in a more entertaining way. Now, Ben Wheatley has a track record in folk horror that Alex Garland doesn't have. His first really great movie, it was actually his second film. His first film, amusingly enough, was a British gangster film, a very good one called Down Terrace, which he made in about 9 days flat in his house. It's actually very good if you've never seen it. Anyway, his second film was Kill List. And Kill List remains, for me, I think, the single best horror film of the 21st century so far. But it actually plays out. You don't know it's a folk horror film to begin with. It plays out as a sort of hitman drama. Two hitmen are hired by a secret organisation to go around and kill a list of people who seem to be unconnected to each other. And it's only as the film builds that you realise that this organisation is a sort of cult, it's a sect, and that they are part of its overall ritual, just as Edward Woodward is part of the overall ritual of the island in The Wicker Man. So it's a film that feeds off The Wicker Man, but very cleverly takes The Wicker Man into a new genre. In his second folk horror film, A Field in England, Ben Wheatley kind of gets rid of narrative altogether. The two hitmen become two warring magicians, and they're kind of warring against each other. And they find themselves in a field. One of them has been pursuing the other because the other has stolen his magic books and his magic artifacts. And they have this kind of battle in the middle of this field. And it all gets really weird at the end. And there's a circle in which they find themselves, and they can't get out of this circle. And there's the use of magic mushrooms to induce a drug-induced phantasmagoria, which also happens, both of these things happen at the end of In the Earth, the film we're talking about here. When I first saw A Field in England, I kind of rejected it, partly because Wheatley abandons narrative and just makes strange and just has fun with imagery, and that kind of annoyed me. But when I watched it the second time round, I kind of fell in love with the movie. It's a great film, it's very original, and I love its textures and I love its acting. And of course there's the great tent scene. Those of you who've seen the film will know what I'm talking about. Now the third film in this folk horror trilogy of Ben Wheatley is nowhere near as good. And I am not going to claim it's on the same level as Kill List or A Field in England, because it ain't. What this is Ben Wheatley's COVID movie. He made it during lockdown, and you can tell it's a very small scale, scaled down movie made almost completely on location outside. And it's about lockdown. It's set during a pandemic, and everyone's sort of locked down and using masks and isolating from each other. And it's about this young scientist, quite an amusing performance by the central actor, I think. And what he's done is he's travelled across country, and he wants to link up with an old scientist he used to work for in the past, who's now gone on field work in this woodland that's been cut off by the authorities. You're never told why. But this woodland has been cut off as being dangerous, and she's working in this woodland, and he wants to get to her and work with her. So a ranger is assigned to him to take him into the woodland. So there's a kind of heart of darkness element, and we're going to find out when they get into the woodland that this woman has gone full Kurtz, full Marlon Brando. Anyway, so they begin this voyage into the woodland, this English woodland, and soon they come across Reece Shearsmith, who was also in Field in England. Reece Shearsmith, I think, is a very variable actor, but he's very good with Ben Wheatley, and he's excellent here. He brings in a wonderful line of black comedy, which he plays completely deadpan, and it's a really great performance, actually. It's very funny. I don't really want to say any more because it will spoil it, right? Though you can't really spoil the plot of this film because the plot is bizarre, it's bonkers, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not supposed to. As I say, this is a classic case of an art house director desperately not wanting to make a straightforward horror film, but to sort of take you into a phantasmagoria of theme and idea and symbolism, which some people might find very irritating. So why do I like this movie so much? Well, because sometimes you can watch a movie and you know it's a bit silly, really, and it's being a bit up its own arse. But I love the textures. It hits all my buttons. It's folk horror. It's all filmed in the British countryside, like Alex Garland's Men, and both films look gorgeous. And I'm always very fond of films that make use of the English countryside, because the English countryside is very special, it's very beautiful and unique, and very few British filmmakers have used it well. And both of these films use the English landscape well, particularly In the Earth, which is all set in a forest. That's the first point. The second point is throughout, the film looks beautiful. The cinematography is excellent. And Ben Wheatley, here he is in lockdown making a movie, and he's clearly just having a bit of fun. This is just, Ben Wheatley's playpen. He's just using this movie to experiment with sight and sound. And some of the visual, pyrotechnics towards the end of this film are stunning. There's this kind of, psychedelic sequence when they look into the heart of nature, and there's a sequence where the main character finds herself in this ring of mushrooms that are producing spores, so she's having a sort of mushroom-induced, acid vision, and the colour is amazing. You'll marvel at a shot where Reece Shearsmith is holding a flare, and the traces of the flare are coming into the camera. It's Ben Wheatley having a bit of a laugh, really. And at the end, the scientist, the female scientist who's experimenting in the wood, she keeps using flashing light and music, strobe music, to try and animate the spirit of nature in the forest. And it's really kind of like, it's Ben Wheatley having a bit of meta fun here, a scientist turning the forest into a film landscape of flashing light and music. Talking about the music, if you are a lover, as I am, of 80s style, synth music and electronic music, the music of people like Paddy Kingsland and Peter Howell, and those kind of people who worked on Doctor Who, for example, you will love this movie. The music is gorgeous, it's very 80s, it's very retro. And what's interesting about this is, if you like 80s retro music, you may have heard of Ghostbox Records. Ghostbox Records is a label of modern electronic musicians who produce deliberately retro-sounding synth music, like music for old horror films or TV shows or public information films or game shows. And, it's hauntology, for those of you who like to know wanky words. Hauntology. And the co-creator of Ghostbox Records, Julian House, he designed the end credits, and they look like sort of pH, chemistry lab charts. They're really, really rather beautiful. I quite like them, actually. So I'm very fond of Julian House's work on the Ghostbox CD labels. They look gorgeous, I think. And so if you like that kind of retro stuff, this film is catnip. And the whole movie is a pastiche of 70s movies. The opening credits, everything is really 70s. And of course, it also keys into Nigel Neal territory. So, how Nigel Neal fuses folklore and ancient history with modern technology. Well, that's this film to a T. That's exactly what it's doing. So it hits all those levels that I like. Folk horror, Nigel Neal, 80s synth music, playing around with colour and texture, Julian House's wonderful designs. And also running through it is this wonderful strain of black comedy, which some people might not like, but tickled me. Because there's this hilarious running gag through the film that the main guy, about a third of the way into the film, he suffers this horrible injury to his foot, which is really over the top. And then throughout the film, people have to keep treating the foot, so they have to keep stitching it together with catgut or cauterizing it or chopping off gangrenous toes. And the main character goes through fits of horrible pain, and it's actually very funny. I don't know why it is, it's just really funny. So it's a film that, if you take it too seriously, or you try to get into the narrative, you will hate it. But if you are a lover of the things I've talked about, sit back, have a beer or a cocoa, whatever your drink of choice, and just wallow in the fun that Ben Wheatley is having, and you will love it. You will really love it. And I think it's a film you'll go back to. I've ordered the Blu-ray. I really like this movie, and I hope you do too. If you like my content, please like and subscribe, and let me know any other modern folk horror films that you're interested in. Thanks very much.